We just heard Jesus say, you cannot serve two masters. You cannot serve God and mammon. Mammon meaning money or economic prosperity. So Jesus says that. But haven't people of all times and all places and all systems and circumstances tried to do both? Serve God and mammon. Our own nation seems to try to do both, right? We're among all the developed nations of the world, we are among the richest. We are also high on belief in God and belief in church attendance. Serving God. But our nation is also extraordinarily high, again, compared to other similar nations, in poverty, ill health, murders, homelessness, economic inequality. Serving mammon. You cannot serve both God and mammon, Jesus says. Now, you here, I think, is both individual, me, you, and also collective, us, our societies, nations of the world. It's about systems developed at the service of money, systems that violate our deep sense of justice, but at the same time suck us in to their practices. Remember what the prophet Amos says in our first reading. God has sent Amos from the south, Judea, to the north, Israel. And Israel at that time was a society very much like ours. It was very prosperous. Things were going very well, and it was highly exploitative of the poor. Great prosperity founded on oppression, the inevitable outcome of serving mammon. And was a society, we should note with proper fear, that was wiped off the face of the earth just 2 decades after Amos preached his word of warning. No wonder you and I sometimes tremble for our future and the future of our children and our grandchildren. Hear this, God tells Amos to say. Hear this, you who trample upon the needy and destroy the poor of the land. The poor of the land today, people driven from their farms, from their livelihoods, by climate change, by war, by violence, by the search for power and money. Are not the poor of the land those we've been hearing about in Jackson, Mississippi recently? Right? A city, the capital of Mississippi, but a city that is predominantly African American and low income. And they were without drinking water for 4 weeks. Why? Not because of the flood, that was part of it, but because poor people can't afford to maintain good drinking water systems. They can't afford the taxes. The rich go elsewhere. Or maybe you heard the story about Brett Favre in Mississippi, where some folks in Mississippi, government officials who were responsible for distributing federal dollars intended for low-income people, funneled that money to their friends, including Brett Favre for a $4 million volleyball facility for his daughter's volleyball team. And Mississippi is hardly unique. Flint, Michigan went through this a few years ago, right, with lead in the drinking water. Why? Poor racial minorities. Witness our whole country. As rich as we are, as much as we spend on medical care, we refuse to guarantee health care to everyone. Even after COVID exposed the injustices of our healthcare system for all to see. So I hear the words of the Lord in Amos, and I'm outraged. But I also hear the words, and I'm convicted, and I'm ashamed. Now those to whom Amos spoke faithfully kept all the laws and pious practices of their religion. That's what he says, putting these words into the mouths of the people. When will the new moon be over? The new moon would be a sign of a religious festival is finished. Okay? When will the new moon be over, that we may sell our grain, and the Sabbath, that we may display the wheat? We will diminish the ephah and to add to the shekel, and fix our scales for cheating. It's notable that our society, as religious as we are, we don't even wait for the Sabbath to be over. We make the Sabbath just another day for commerce, market, and consumption. Cheating? Fixing the scales for cheating? How about the serial scandals at Wells Fargo? How about the many, many, many pyramid schemes, investment pyramid schemes to swindle people out of their hard-earned money? How about computer crimes? And then he goes on to say these words of the Lord: we will buy the lowly for silver and the poor for a pair of sandals. And I hear these words and I think of modern-day slavery, modern-day human trafficking. I hear these words and I think of millionaire athletes and their expensive shoes and shoe deals. But I also think, how much of the clothing and shoes that I'm wearing were made in sweatshops? So I hear the words of the Lord in Amos and I'm outraged, but I'm also convicted and ashamed. So what then does the Lord ask of me? What does the Lord ask of us? So I believe he asks for the difficult daily work of both honest self-examination and social awareness of what's going on, what's the reality of our world. How am I complicit in climate change, in the exploitation of the poor, in cheating? When do I serve my job, my savings, instead of serving the Lord? What am I called to do after I discern the answer to these questions? What would the Lord ask me to do? How much of my income, how much of my wealth really belongs to me? And how much do they belong to the needy of our country, of our world? Now, my wife rewrites all my homilies. And so when she rewrote this one, she showed me something. Some of you get this Living Faith booklet, comes once a month, and it has a reflection for every day. And here's part of the reflection for today, which really puts it right down. This is Elizabeth Duffy writing. In our society, after one pays off a mortgage, we receive papers declaring a house is ours. But I know I will not be here forever. And what is currently mine will one day belong to another. Ownership ultimately is a transitory thing. From God's viewpoint, possession of earthly things may even be an illusion. So I try to keep in mind that not only do I live in God's world, but I am also one of the many members of God's creation, and that is a calling to ministry and to stewardship. So how do I deal with things that I own but really aren't mine? How do I do ministry and stewardship in this time and this place? So I think we have to look inward and look outward. Inwardly, I try to discern to what degree am I as candid as possible with myself? Am I really honest with myself about my material resources? Do they hold me captive? Have I become an idol? Have they become idols? And I have to look outward. Have I really entered into seeing and responding to the plight of the poor? And for those of us who are parents, do I model that discernment for my children? Do I teach them how to discern God's call to them inwardly and to see the world honestly. This last question is especially important on Catechetical Sunday today, where we'll be blessing the aides and teachers who will help form our children in the faith. It's our responsibility as parents primarily, but the persons from the parish volunteer to help us in that responsibility. So we need to support them in helping our children to serve God rather than mammon. And we have some concrete examples recently of how people have either responded to the call to help the poor or have directed us in ways to do that. If we're wealthy, I don't know how many of us are, but if we're really wealthy, we have the example of the founder of Patagonia, just this last week, announced he's giving his company away to a nonprofit, and all the profits of that company will go to the poor of the world. If we are business owners, or if we're managers of businesses, Pope Francis, just last week, spoke to business owners in Italy. And here's what he said. He said, you got a responsibility of ownership and management of business. And here's some of the things you're responsible for. Pay your taxes. Pay taxes sacrificially to help the common good of society. Pay a living wage to all your workers. Keep people employed even when it's a sacrifice. And keep the gap between what you earn as an owner or manager, keep the gap between that and your employees narrow. In our country, it's the widest in the world. If we're neither of the above, we're just citizens, maybe. What do we do as citizens? So, just last week, again, the Secretary General of the United Nations, responding to the plight of Pakistan, which has been devastated by floods, more than 1,500 killed, 1/3 of the land underwater from climate change, said, who's responsible? The wealthy countries of the world are responsible for changing the climate. So we have a responsibility to give, whether to nonprofits or in government aid, give to the people of Pakistan. And in our own parish, we have opportunities, right? After Mass, Catherine's House will be outside. Catherine's House is a ministry of the Sisters of Mercy, and they help homeless women and their children to find housing. They have a raffle going. You can either donate or buy raffle tickets. Habitat for Humanity builds houses for low-income families, and we help as a parish to build a house every year. So you can volunteer for that, and you can sign one of the beams that's going to go into that house outside after Mass. Volunteer for social justice, many other social justice and outreach ministries in the parish. We cannot serve both God and economics. We're called to discern how we serve God rather than mammon.